Let me ask you something right now. Have you ever felt like there's a conversation happening behind closed doors and all you're getting is the echo? You turn on the news, you scroll through your feed, and there it is, a headline that makes your heart stop for a moment. America openly supporting Pakistan against India. And suddenly you start to wonder why? What's really going on here? Is it about friendship? Is it strategy? Is it fair? Now, before we jump to conclusions, before the pointing fingers and the political opinions come flooding in, I want you to take a deep breath with me. Because this is not just about countries. This is not just about governments and power and influence. This is about understanding. This is about choosing wisdom over outrage. It's about remembering that in a world that often profits from division, your clarity, your calm, your informed heart is a revolutionary act. I've learned something through all my years of listening, asking questions, and sitting across from people of every background, every belief, every country. Nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Behind every alliance, every policy, every diplomatic handshake, there is history, there is fear, there is hope. So today, we are not here to take sides. We are here to explore a deeper truth. We are here to ask the hard questions with open minds. We are here to find not just what's happening, but why. And when we begin to understand the why, we begin to reclaim our power as global citizens, not just as spectators, but as voices that matter. Let's talk about it. Have you ever looked at a moment in history, whether in your life or the life of nations, and realized that what you see on the surface barely scratches the truth beneath? That's how it is with global relationships. That's how it is when we talk about America and Pakistan or America and India. You might hear it in the news. You might hear people saying things like America is supporting Pakistan against India, and you might feel a wave of confusion, maybe even frustration, because it doesn't seem to make sense. Why would a country that has worked so closely with India suddenly shift its energy, its tone, its apparent support in another direction? But what I've come to learn, and I say this with every ounce of experience and compassion I have, is that global relationships are never simple. Never. When you look at two nations and their ties, you're not just looking at two flags, you're looking at centuries of history. You're looking at deeply layered cultures. You're looking at people who have struggled, grown, and dreamed within their own realities. And you're looking at leaders, men and women, trying to balance safety, power, influence, and politics all in the same breath. It's easy to say America should stand with India. It's easy to say America is playing both sides, but the truth is often more complicated than that. Sometimes what looks like support for one country is really about managing risk, or keeping doors open, or maintaining a line of communication that could prevent a much bigger crisis. Sometimes it's not even about either country. Sometimes it's about other nations watching and the ripple effect that a single decision can cause across continents. And that's hard to see when all we have is a headline or a tweet or a soundbite on the evening news. It's hard to see the nuance, the caution, the strategic patience it takes to operate on a global stage. Now, I know that word strategy can sound cold, but let's be honest, governments don't operate like people do. They aren't driven by emotion in the way we are. They are driven by interests. And that's where it gets complicated, because the interests of America are not always rooted in morality or loyalty. They're rooted in economics, in defense, in influence, and yes, sometimes in survival. And you don't have to like that. You don't even have to agree with it, but it helps to understand it. It helps to understand that when America maintains relations with Pakistan, even when there's tension with India, it may be trying to prevent instability in a region where nuclear capabilities exist. It may be trying to balance its presence in South Asia, or to prevent deeper alliances between Pakistan and other global powers who may not share the same values. It may be about influence, not because one country is better than the other, but because the consequences of completely cutting off dialogue could be too dangerous to risk. And yes, it can feel unfair. It can feel like betrayal, especially to the people of India who have opened their arms, who have built partnerships, who have contributed to the global economy and culture in such profound ways. But in the eyes of policymakers, it's not always personal, it's political, it's geopolitical. And that's a different language altogether. Now, that doesn't mean feelings don't matter. That doesn't mean perception doesn't matter. Because when people feel abandoned or overlooked, that does matter. It creates division. It deepens distrust. And that's why these conversations are important. Because understanding that global relationships are not simple isn't the same as saying they don't hurt. But when we stop to really look at why decisions are made, when we explore the layers, we start to see the humanity in it all. We start to see that behind every handshake and every headline, there are people trying, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, to make sense of an incredibly complex world. And maybe, just maybe, we can hold space for both truths at once. We can hold space for the frustration of feeling unheard and the awareness that these decisions are rarely one-sided. We can hold space for disappointment and diplomacy and still choose to seek understanding over outrage. That doesn't mean giving anyone a pass. It means choosing to see with open eyes. It means refusing to be blinded by simplicity in a world that demands depth. So when you hear someone say, "Why is America supporting Pakistan against India?" take a moment before you answer. Ask yourself what part of the story is missing. Ask yourself what history is speaking that hasn't been heard. Ask yourself what motives might be present that have nothing to do with choosing sides and everything to do with managing risk. And ask yourself this: what would it look like to move forward, not with assumptions, but with wisdom? Because wisdom, my friend, changes everything. You know, one of the most powerful lessons life teaches us, whether in our personal relationships or on the world stage, is that people don't always pick sides the way we think they do. Not because they don't care, not because they're being disloyal, but because life is layered, complex. And in the same way, nations, especially a country like the United States, aren't always choosing one friend over another. What they're often doing is protecting shared interests, not personal loyalties, not emotional bonds, interests, strategic ones. Now, I know that can sound distant, even frustrating. Because if you're someone from India and you've seen how deep the ties between the US and India have grown through technology, education, trade, culture, you might think, shouldn't that mean something? And if you're watching America engage with Pakistan diplomatically or militarily, you might feel something inside you say, this doesn't feel right. And I hear you. I see that reaction because it's rooted in hope, in belief, in a sense of connection. But I want you to lean in a little closer with me and consider this. What if it's not about choosing one country over another, but about managing relationships in a world where things shift every day, where decisions aren't made in a vacuum but are shaped by history, economics, defense strategies, and future risks? What if what looks like favoritism is actually a balancing act? See, the truth is, America's foreign policy has always been driven by what it calls national interest. And that's not just about who they like more, it's about what keeps the system stable, what prevents war, what opens markets, what allows them to have a seat at every table. That's not always pretty, it's not always comforting, but it's often the way the game is played. It doesn't mean America doesn't value India, it doesn't mean it blindly supports Pakistan. It means it sees both countries as valuable in different ways. Think about that friend in your life who knows two people who don't get along. They try to be kind to both. They don't always take sides because they know that doing so might cause more harm than good. In some ways, that's how diplomacy works. It's about staying engaged with all players, even when the relationships between those players are difficult. And with Pakistan, America sees certain strategic advantages. Geography plays a huge role. Pakistan's position between Iran, Afghanistan, India, and China makes it a critical point of influence. For decades, especially during the Cold War and the War on Terror, Pakistan was a key regional partner. That legacy doesn't just vanish. Even when things get tense or problematic, there are still military interests, there are still intelligence relationships, there are still security concerns. And so sometimes engagement continues not because of love or trust, but because walking away could leave a vacuum. And in global politics, a vacuum doesn't stay empty, it gets filled, often by players with very different agendas. And on the other side, America's relationship with India has evolved into one of deep cooperation, economic partnerships, technology exchanges, cultural bonds, shared democratic values, and increasingly, a shared vision for the Indo-Pacific region. That's real. That's not just symbolic. That's investment. That's trust. But again, it's not about sides. It's about interests. And sometimes those interests overlap. Sometimes they conflict. And sometimes they force a nation like America to walk a very thin line, trying to maintain influence in multiple directions without collapsing the balance it depends on. Now, does that always feel good? No. Can it create confusion and even tension? Absolutely. But if we understand that the moves we see on the outside are often about long-term positioning, not short-term favoritism, we can begin to have more honest conversations, not conversations filled with assumptions or outrage, but grounded ones, compassionate ones, conversations that say, I see why this is happening, even if I don't agree with it, because the moment we reduce global relationships to supporting one and betraying the other, we lose the bigger picture, we lose sight of what's really at stake.
And what's at stake is not just national pride, but regional stability, human lives, global peace. So the next time someone says, why is America supporting them? Take a breath. Ask the deeper question, not who's being chosen, but what interests are being served, not who's better, but what future is being calculated. Because in that deeper space, in that stillness between reaction and wisdom, you begin to see the truth for what it is. Foreign policy isn't about favorites, it's about survival, influence, and the delicate dance of shared interests. Let's keep talking.
The lens of media and perception. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone tell your story for you, but they got it all wrong? Maybe they left out the part where you struggled. Maybe they skipped over what you felt. Maybe they just cherry-picked a few moments and called it the truth. And suddenly you're sitting there wondering, how did they get me so wrong? That, my friend, is the power and the danger of perception. Now take that same feeling and stretch it across borders, across governments, across millions of people watching the same event, but through different eyes. That's what happens when media tells the story of international relationships. Especially when the words are short, the tone is sharp, and the headlines are built for speed, not depth. That's what we're living in right now. A time where the soundbite carries more weight than the full conversation. Where someone says America is supporting Pakistan against India, and the internet grabs it, spins it, and suddenly it feels like truth. But is it? See, perception doesn't just color how we see others, it shapes how we feel about ourselves. When people in India hear something that sounds like betrayal, they don't just feel angry, they feel wounded. When someone in Pakistan hears a narrative that sounds like support, they may feel emboldened or validated. And yet beneath all that emotion, the truth is rarely that black or white. It lives in the gray. It lives in the questions that rarely get asked out loud. Who told you this story and why? Who benefits from the way it's framed? Was it shared to inform or to provoke? I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the media we consume is not neutral. It's filtered, shaped, designed, and often it's trying to win attention, not truth. That's not always sinister, it's just the reality of the digital age. But when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to complex relationships like those between the US, India, and Pakistan, that kind of simplification can be dangerous. When we rely only on what we see in a headline or what's trending in our feed, we miss the deeper context. We miss the history, the back-channel conversations, the agreements made behind closed doors, not because they're secretive, but because they're nuanced, because they require time and understanding and a willingness to look at things that don't always feel good, but are necessary to see clearly. And let's be honest, we live in a time where outrage travels faster than truth, where suspicion gets more clicks than nuance, where fear spreads quicker than facts. So when the media shows America shaking hands with Pakistan and says nothing about the defense agreements, humanitarian aid, or back-channel cooperation happening with India at the same time, well, it starts to look like favoritism, like betrayal, like injustice. But I want to invite you to pause. I want to ask you to challenge that first reaction. Because while feelings matter, and they do, it's dangerous to let perception become our only compass. We need more than emotion to understand power. We need more than headlines to understand policy. Let me remind you of something. America is not a single voice, just like India isn't, just like Pakistan isn't. Inside every country is a multitude of leaders, departments, agencies, voices, and perspectives. Some push, some pull, some negotiate, and often their decisions take months, sometimes years, to come to light. So when the media shows you a moment, a snapshot, it's just that, a moment. And we cannot judge the entirety of a relationship by a moment alone. Yes, we need better reporting. Yes, we need deeper journalism. But we also need better listening. We need to teach ourselves and each other how to hold multiple truths, how to feel the sting of a perception, and still have the strength to search for the fuller story. Because what you see may not be what's actually happening, and what's happening may not be what it seems. So here's what I ask of you. When someone says, "Why is America doing this?" don't just react. Investigate. When the headline says support, ask support how? Military, diplomatic, symbolic, temporary, conditional, because it all matters, and it all changes the meaning of what you think you know. You are smart, you are aware, and you deserve the whole truth, not just the loudest version of it. And sometimes the truth isn't given. You have to search for it. You have to ask better questions. You have to look past what's being said and ask why it's being said that way. Because perception can lead people to war, but clarity, real clarity, can lead people to peace. So stay awake, stay curious, and stay brave enough to look beyond what's easy to believe. History isn't a straight line, it's a circle. Sometimes we think of history as something that lives behind us. A set of facts printed in dusty books or old black and white photographs hanging in quiet museums. But the truth is, history doesn't stay behind us, It lives right here, breathing through the choices we make, echoing in the headlines we read, and whispering in the halls of power, even when we think we've moved on. And when we look at America's relationship with Pakistan and India, we can't understand what's happening today unless we remember what happened yesterday. Because these aren't just alliances formed over dinner tables or handshakes at summits. They were born in wars, forged through secrets, tested by tragedy, and yes, shaped by self-interest. Now let's go back, not for nostalgia, but for clarity. After World War II, when nations were scrambling to define their identities and powers were redrawing the global map, the United States was already looking ahead. It saw the Cold War coming like a storm on the horizon, Russia on one side, the West on the other, and in that moment, countries like Pakistan and India weren't just nations, they were pieces on a chessboard. And so when India chose to stay non-aligned, when it said we will not be drawn into a power struggle between East and West, America took note. But Pakistan made a different choice. It aligned, it offered itself as a strategic partner, and in return the US opened the gates, military aid, economic assistance, intelligence cooperation, a relationship built not on love, not on democracy, but on leverage, on need. And year after year, decade after decade, that relationship evolved, sometimes close, sometimes strained, but never completely broken, because Pakistan sat in a position the US couldn't ignore, geographically close to Afghanistan, to Iran, to China, and yes, to India, a location that gave America a kind of access it couldn't afford to lose. But now, come closer, here's the part we don't talk about enough. While America was partnering with Pakistan, India was rising, quietly, consistently, educating generations of engineers, building global businesses, investing in space, tech, medicine, and democracy. And one day the world looked up and said, wait a minute, India isn't just a developing country, it's a global leader. And that changed everything. America began to shift, not abandon one for the other, but expand its circle. And suddenly, you saw new words in the headlines: strategic partnership with India, civil nuclear agreement, defense cooperation, trade deals, diplomatic summits, shared values, shared vision, a different kind of relationship, one not built on war, but on potential. But the thing about history is, it never forgets its roots. Even when you move forward, it pulls at your sleeve. And so even as America builds this powerful friendship with India, it still carries the weight and the habit of its long entanglement with Pakistan. And that's where the confusion comes in, doesn't it? That's where people start to say, if America calls India its partner, why is it still engaging with Pakistan? And I understand that question, I feel that question, because when history drags its feet, people feel like they're being left behind, like their story isn't being honored. But what we have to remember is that nations don't change direction the way we flip a switch. These relationships, some over 70 years old, don't disappear overnight. They shift slowly, carefully, strategically, and sometimes awkwardly. It's like trying to turn a massive ship in the middle of a storm. You might have a new destination in mind, but the waves of the past are still crashing around you. The alliances you made when the world was different still shape the waters you sail in today. So what do we do with that? We acknowledge it. We learn from it. We remind ourselves that history isn't a straight line, it's a circle. And every time we come back around, we have the chance to do it better, to see more clearly, to make decisions not based on what we once needed, but on who we've become. India and Pakistan are not the same countries they were in 1947 or 1971 or even 2001, and neither is the United States. So when we talk about support or alliance or favoritism, we must bring that context into the room. Otherwise, we're judging the present by the shadows of the past. This is the work of awareness, of maturity, of wisdom, to hold the past in one hand and the present in the other, and ask ourselves, where do we go from here? Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Not to dwell, but to rise, because if we keep pretending history doesn't matter, we'll keep walking in circles without ever realizing we're repeating what we didn't heal. And we're not here to repeat, we're here to rise. Let me tell you something that may not feel good at first. Nations don't make decisions based on feelings. They don't pick favorites because of affection. They move with intention, with calculation, with strategy. Now that might sound cold, even harsh, especially if you're sitting in a place that feels ignored, overlooked, or even betrayed. But if we really want to understand why things happen the way they do, if we want to stop reacting and start seeing clearly, then we need to shift how we view power. See, relationships between countries aren't built the way friendships are. There's no birthday call, no thinking of you text, no emotional loyalty that overrides logic. There's only one question that gets asked again and again behind those closed doors: what serves our interest right now? And that's what we're watching play out on the global stage when it comes to America's approach to Pakistan and India. It's not about liking one more than the other. It's about what's working in the moment to serve a larger, often invisible strategy. Now, hear me clearly. That doesn't mean it's always fair. That doesn't mean it's always right. But it does mean it's deliberate. Let's step back and really look. India, with its booming economy, its massive talent pool, its growing influence in technology, defense, space, it is undeniably a global power on the rise. The United States sees that, recognizes it, and more importantly, respects it. So you're seeing trade deals, military partnerships, climate collaboration. These aren't gestures, these are investments in a long-term vision. But now look at Pakistan. It's a different context altogether. Geopolitically, it holds keys that America sometimes still needs: access to Afghanistan, intelligence relationships that date back decades, influence in regions that are volatile and unpredictable. And so in moments, even if brief, the U.S. leans in, not because it's favoring one side over another, but because it's navigating a chessboard that most people never get to see. It's realpolitik, it's strategy, and it's not personal. But let me ask you this: what if it feels personal anyway? What if, sitting in India, you hear that the U.S. has released aid to Pakistan or is engaging diplomatically, and it makes you ask, why are they helping the very country that challenges us, sometimes even harms us? That's a fair question, and it deserves a real answer. Here's the truth. Power doesn't move in straight lines. It weaves, it bends, it balances. And sometimes nations engage with opposing players, not because they agree with them, but because they're trying to prevent something worse, like escalation, like collapse, like war. So what may feel like support for an adversary may in reality be a strategic attempt to reduce pressure, to keep the temperature down, even if it risks sending the wrong message in the short term. But here's what's important to remember. Strategic engagement does not mean equal alliance. When you look at the scale of America's partnerships, India is emerging not just as a partner of interest, but as a partner of values, shared democratic ideals, shared economic aspirations, shared long-term vision. That alignment goes deeper than momentary gestures. So while headlines might say support and public forums might stir frustration, the deeper reality, the one underneath the surface, tells a different story. One where long-term alliances are being built, not on proximity, but on principle, not on temporary convenience, but on enduring potential. Now that's not always easy to see, because what dominates the news cycle is the now, the latest visit, the newest handshake. But power doesn't always play in public. It works through years of agreements, through policy decisions, through subtle but significant shifts in influence. And in that story, India's role is rising, not because of sentiment, but because of strategy. Because in a world looking for stability, for leadership, for innovation, India offers a future that is compelling, capable, and cooperative. So don't be misled by what's loud. Pay attention to what's lasting. Let me tell you this: you are not invisible. You are not being passed over, and your value is not measured by the momentary moves of foreign policy. India is not just being noticed, India is being counted on. And that, my friend, is a kind of support that goes far beyond headlines. It's the kind that is building something real. So don't lose faith because of the noise. Learn to see the moves behind the moves. Trust that what's quiet today may be leading to something powerful tomorrow, because in the end, it's not about what's said the loudest, it's about what endures the longest.